Jesus, all the way. I'll forever trust in you. Jesus, all the way.
JC 24/7.
It is said that the various forms of music with which we are affiliated today make you want to, clap your hands over your ears. Is that describe, or does that describe the type of music with which you are affiliated, to which you are exposed? Can we find some kind of medium to help us understand the quality of music that will be enriching and inspiring? Well, we are entering into a very intricate and perhaps what might be a very contentious discussion regarding music, culture, and the Christian. Can these three become one without getting into a fight? Well, I hope my panelists do not get into a fight as we discuss this all-important issue. We have on set here Dr. Vernon Andrews, a musician and consultant of many years' experience. Please do not undermine or underestimate the hoary here. It comes with a wealth of experience. Next to him is Eldon Blackman, who is a lecturer, but he's also the chair of the music department at the University of the Southern Caribbean. And of course, next to him is Evervescent Junior Lett. He is a producer and also a musician. Some may even say he's a recording artist, but he is here to help. All of them are here to help in this all-important discussion of music, the culture, and the Christian. Before we get into discussion, perhaps I can borrow a definition that is quite simple so that it will give some kind of context to our discussion. The behaviors, customs, arts, and beliefs characteristic of a particular society, ethnicity, or age group relative to a certain period can be one of the definitions we have of culture. And so, Dr. Andrews, I want to ask you first, by public demand and by public vote, can you help us understand, can a Christian avoid being influenced by his culture? We are the light of the world, the salt of the earth. Are we meant to influence our culture or be influenced by, or can it happen simultaneously?
Thank you very much. My answer to that question is no.
Okay.
The Christian will be influenced and can be influenced by his culture. Let me take the definition that you just read to a different level.
Sure.
In the context of persons who are creatures of God's creation, I look at everything from that very wide and broad perspective. And as we look at the Bible, which provides us with a source of information in terms of human beings and their reactions to situations and experiences. The first that comes to mind, one of the earliest that comes to mind, remember the children of Israel were brought out of Egypt. Right. They lived there for years and years.
Right.
And they were steeped in the culture of Egypt.
Okay.
Even though they were adherents in some respect, they were God's people, quote unquote. But after they came out of Egypt and they were on their way to Israel, Moses went up into Sinai to get the law, and he was away for a while. And what happened? Well, they thought he was staying a little bit long. And they approached Aaron, and we know all about the golden calf. So they produced the golden calf, and they were worshipping the golden calf. And they were using music.
Music, that's right.
Moses, on his way down, thought things were sounding a little bit strange. What's that I'm hearing? Now that was the culture of Egypt.
Right.
That with which they were familiar.
Right.
But if I understand the biblical record correctly, it did not seem to tally with or line up with what Moses anticipated or expected.
Right.
That suggests to me, therefore, that as we look at culture, as we observe culture, we must recognize the possibility that there are elements of the divine and elements that are not of the divine. And I stop there at this point.
Elder, I'm not sure if you will have anything to challenge that. At least you might be on the same page with the doc, at least in this instance. But how do we go about deciding which elements are divine and which elements are not divine? To what extent can a Christian, navigate through cultural norms and say, well, this is of God and this is not of God?
Well, first of all, let me thank you for inviting me to this discussion.
Thank you for coming. I needed help, sir.
Let me see if I'll need some by the time we get through. Being able to navigate, the divine and the not divine, as Dr. Andrews
Right.
has said, is not an easy job. It's not an easy task, and it's something that you have to face every day.
Right.
But there are guidelines, there are examples that are in the Bible that tell us, for one thing, that there are things in the culture that we grew up in or that we live in that may not necessarily agree with
Right.
or, and this is a term that we used a little while ago, worldview,
Right.
as Christians. And one clear example of that would be when Jesus met the woman at the well.
Right.
It was not a cultural norm for Jews to talk to Samaritans. There were cultural norms that said how men should relate to women and
Right.
how women should relate to men. And we know that when Jesus came, he did a lot of norm breaking. You need to have a relationship with God, the Heavenly Father, in order to be able to know the things in the culture that would work in that relationship.
Right.
Because, I mean, for our purposes here, we're basically, well, one of the things we're discussing is sacred music. Its purpose and how we should use it in our lives and the function it should have in our lives. And if we're discussing sacred music, then we're talking about the theology of the music, the relationship that it defines between the believer and God, and then we're also talking about how we relate to that music and the values that music would espouse.
Okay.
And if we're talking about that, then we've got to think of, well, are the things from this culture, how do they match up with that? How do they match up with my relationship with God? How do they match up with the values that I'm trying to portray and the values that I want to have in my life? So we've got to reconcile with ourselves how those things come together. And if we find that they're not coming together, again, depending on our relationship with God, then that's when we have some discussion.
Let's get into the heart of the matter, Mr. Junior. Let music and culture. Is music influenced by culture, or does culture influence music? Is there some kind of symbiotic relationship there?
Thank you for having me, Pastor. And of course, it's always a pleasure to be in esteemed company.
I know the pleasure's all mine. Sir.
The thing is, I'll say off the bat that I definitely think it's symbiotic.
Okay.
I think they're different in terms of culture, and we'll get down to the brass tacks in terms of the reality of the situation. Culture, and we have to now understand. We have to try to figure out exactly what our culture is, because culture is something that we can take and use the term very loosely. This is our culture. That is our culture. This is our culture. Sometimes we create culture and don't even know that we are creating a culture. And it might be influenced. It will be obviously influenced by other cultures. I feel as though, take for instance, if you go and delve into the pop music, popular music, a culture that speaks to that glorifies money and that kind of lifestyle, you would see the music now kind of surrounding that. You'll see the music now talking about that. You know, back in the days when you had Madonna, Material Girl, and all of these things, because at that time the culture was speaking that. You know, in the U.S. it was less about this, you know, and you know it's about flam and flair, and you have to have this. You know, so we could say now definitely that that the culture would have influenced that. But then in the same breath, you could now say that when you hear something all the time over the airwaves, it can now become part of your culture.
Right.
So if you have the whole the music that speaks to Gaza and Gully and you know who is bad man and who is not bad man, and you know, and all of these things, and what you would do to people of a particular persuasion, and you hear that enough, and you have people listening to that enough, then you start, studies show that you start finding that becoming part of your culture. I remember years ago there was a gentleman that came from the US. I can't remember his name now, a doctor. It wasn't Dr. Andrews. But, yeah, he came, was a foreigner. He came from the US. And he came down here. This would have been in the late 2000s. That's probably like early 2000s, probably like 2001, 2002. And I remember him coming with a study that was telling the folks of Trinidad and Tobago, the powers that be, I've done a study. I've done a study in Jamaica that shows because of the music and the influence of the music in their culture, that is why they had a rapid murder rate, and that's what was going on, because people were becoming a little more violent and they were studying. I knew, for whatever the reason or the intent was, I knew he was kind of more downplayed, and he left here with his hands up in the air. And I don't know if it's coincidence, but soon after that, you know, we started to see a major increase in society, where you start to see, and I'm not trying to step on anybody's toes, because I'm just showing the influence that music would have. And, you know, there would have been an increase in the way that people behave in that kind of violent kind of behavior, because, you know, people would stay, you know, people would talk. If you could speak to the whole calling some, you know, Uncle Demon and Father Satan and all these things, and you have people saying that all the time, then guess what? You're now building a group of people who could really care less, because that is now becoming part of their culture. Whether it be gang culture or not, is becoming part of their culture. So I'm saying that now, and then I wouldn't end on the bad side. There are people who know their countries, and there are people even here, you know, who would have within their home a culture where all that is being, what you would hear is something that is positive and music that is uplifting. And, you know, you're not living in a bubble, but the reality is that it's a place where you could now feel at rest, you know, you feel your mind feel at ease. I always laugh and say, I don't know how, I mean, this is me, I don't know how people could get up in the morning and start the day with music that's just jarring and blaring. I don't know how they do it. Somehow you have to now kind of be suited into that day. It could probably come later on. But, you know, somehow. So I'm just, you know.
We all have different preferences for different genres of music. I'm not sure what your preference is. I may want to guess and hazard a guess at that. But, you know, we're treating with the whole question of music and culture. Is it true to say that preferences could be influenced by culture?
I like to make the point in my presentations. Let us have carnival. Let's have the costuming. Let's have the trucks, this, that, everything.
Right.
But no
music.
Would we have carnival? All right. Now, I remember when I was at Andrews University the first time, and I happened to be the president of the Music Guild. And one of the sessions we had, I got a recording of a steel band to play. It was a recording. And the chairperson of the department came to me and asked me afterwards, "You sure there wasn't an organ in there someplace?" I said, "No, there were only steel bands." Now, that suggests a certain commonality in terms of sound of various instruments. Now, that could be a very deep discussion. You asked earlier on for a definition of the purpose of music, and I don't want to anticipate or jump the gun. But I like, and this came into my mind for the first time, music is a lubricant in human life. We listen to music for different things. Reliever of stress, or sometimes increaser of stress. You can do all of that.
That's right.
You know? But music can do so many things to the human organism. Good, bad, and indifferent. Now, as we begin to look at culture in detail, we've got to look at it and ask this question: in what direction is the music taking us? Now, it's possible I may listen to one piece of music today, Elder may listen to the same piece of music, Junior may listen to the same piece of music, we'll have completely different reactions.
Right.
And that's normal.
Right.
Further than that, I may listen to the same piece of music today, same piece of music tomorrow, have a completely different.
Good.
So we're dealing with a number of complex things.
Okay.
But let my colleagues
Okay.
jump in.
Ellen, forgive me. I want to ask this question concerning chutney and soca. You are from Barbados, so I'm not sure if you would have much to relate to it, but you're a musician nonetheless. So let me jump first to Junior, and if you want to comment on it, feel free to do so. Junior, chutney and soca and calypso and kaiso, the full works, should they ever be part of the Christian's repertoire of music? Seem not to be all cultural Christians. so to speak.
And this is where I guarantee you it gets a bit contentious, especially in Trinidad and Tobago.
Right.
Tobago a lot too,
Right.
because Tobago seems to be a little more conservative
That's right.
in terms of their approach when what's considered holy and what is not holy and
Right.
what should be, And I'll say this: I remember going to Guinea years ago in the in Africa, and I remember being a part of their worship session. And apart from, they were doing some traditional songs, what we would consider traditional American songs. I was very surprised because they spoke, some would have spoken English, but I was being a part of worship and there was familiar song. Now, music is a universal language, so whether they speak English or not, when you hear the melody going, hey, well, that's this song.
Right.
Rock of Ages will always be Rock of Ages wherever, no matter what language you sing it in.
Right.
And then there was a little session that they had when they broke into their traditional music. So they spoke in their native language, they sang in their native tongue, and they broke out the dancers, the drums, the African drums, and we had discussion after, and I was like, wow. And they were so proud, and I thought they probably would have done that, to show their culture to the foreigners that were there. And in discussing after, they said, no, that's a normal part of our worship. We take it at a different level. There are different times and places. Sometimes we just break into praise, and that could go on for an hour. And the thing is that I'm saying now that they were very proud of their culture.
Right.
Now, I think because of what most very traditional Christians would consider holy, and what they more so would consider unholy, because of where it probably would come from, where they see it at this point in time.
Right.
I think that's where it kind of becomes skewed. So if I were to play a piece of music for you with a cut time signature 2/2, and you're going down and you're going down with the syncopation and all of that, you would probably think, okay, that's some kaiso, some calypso that they decide to play in the people church.
Right.
But if you put a chorus, Jesus' name so sweet, on top of that, then it becomes now, okay, fine, but I'm not too sure how I feel about it still.
Yeah.
Because that music, it really belongs somewhere else.
Right, okay.
To answer the question directly, I believe there's a place for everything when it comes to different genre of music. Because if you take chutney music or calypso music, and you take it to a place, a very small island, or somewhere far away from Trinidad, they would probably be clueless. And because they would not be tainted, they would accept it, and it's like, wow, it's just a different kind of song. I just like it. I don't know, it's just very nice. They wouldn't say, oh, gosh, that is carnival, unless they know that it belongs somewhere else. Now, this is my feeling. I mean, everybody's entitled to their opinion.
Yeah.
And I feel as though there's a place for everything. I will have my preference. I would feel that sometimes some things just don't belong, but again, that's based on culture. I know one of our DJs on our station will say, Junior, I love to hear in the morning, but I don't know, boy, I just can't go to work to slow music, boy. He tells me that, I mean, and it's not like he doesn't like, of course, he's very Christian, very much a child of God, but his preference is more this.
Eldon. I mean, the Doc did say that we all may disagree at some point. Is this one of these issues? I don't know. I don't know where you stand with all this. I mean, this guy he's embraced it. He's opened the door. What do you do?
I don't know. Well, some interesting words he's been using. Preference is one. We figure out how does that fit into the whole scheme of things.
Right. Do you believe, as you're thinking, do you believe preferences will have a lot to do with some of the legislation
Legislation.
that used in terms of guidelines and stuff like that?
Well, let me jump in and let me give him something. I will pass something to him and see how he responds to it. If I make the statement, there's no such thing as gospel music, only gospel lyrics, what would you say? Or no such thing as Christian music, there's only Christian lyrics, what would you say?
Ooh, boy.
You're complicating matters. What's
No,
up?
I mean, this is because it is what it is. Because if we agree to that premise, then all the genre wouldn't really make a difference, would it?
Well, let me see. To that, I'd say this. Really and truly, I've been trying to figure that out too. I've been trying to figure out whether there is really something that we would call sacred music.
Right.
And it's quite interesting because, as you were alluding to, if I come in with my essay, imagine I'm a saxophonist, which I'm not, and I came in here with my saxophone and I just started to play something. You've never heard it before. You have no connection to it. You don't know what to connect it to. I just started to play something, and at the end of my 2 minutes of playing, I ask you, well, what do what are your thoughts on what I just played? Is it sacred? Was it secular? Was it sacred? Did that transport you to somewhere heavenly? Did you feel, and I don't know what your response might be. And if you tell me, well, it was sacred, well, what made you think that? And then you have whatever response you'd give me.
Right.
And as I was thinking about it this morning and yesterday and beyond, before, all the way back, from the time Pastor Eddie called me, John, in the beginning was the Word.
Right.
Never said in the beginning was the music. No, music was there. Music was always there. But in the beginning was the Word. Most times, and that's what defines sacred music, the Word. So, now, how do we reconcile that with genre? That's
Right.
another story. But in the beginning was the Word. And people who write about this topic of it,
So you're agreeing that to some extent, or well, maybe to more than just some extent, it is highly subjective.
it is highly subjective. It
Yeah,
is highly
that's true.
subjective. But, all the way through from the Old Testament right down,
Right.
there are things that God said, hello,
Okay.
here's what I want you to do, and here's how I want you to do it. Any deviation from this is not what I want. Cain and Abel. Cain was farming, Abel was tending sheep.
Mhm.
The Lord said he wanted sheep. Cain thought, well, nothing big.
Sacrifice is a sacrifice.
A sacrifice is a sacrifice. My fruits are just as good as his sheep. I don't see why I can't bring fruit. And he brought fruit, and we all know what happened. And to us, that might seem like something small,
Right.
but that's not what God asked for. That was not God's directive. That's not how he intended it to be. So that's again something we have to, that's just one of those things that
I'm sure the doc is itching to come in because you would have been exposed, Doc, to this question time and time again. So let's give us the eternal answer.
Well, I don't know if it's the eternal answer, but I want to introduce two very simple words. Association and appropriateness. As Eldon said, and with which I agree,
Wow,
talked about.
he does agree with you.
Oh, I
I'm
agree
not
with-
sure if he
I
agrees.
agree with lots of what my colleagues have been
Okay,
saying.
there you go.
You can't come in here and play something for a minute and you ask, sacred or sacred. I take it to a more ridiculous limit. What I do all the time, when this question comes, I say, okay, if there's an instrument, I say, I'm going to play a piece of music. I want you to listen very carefully, and after I play the piece of music, tell me whether it's sacred or secular. So if it's a piano or a keyboard, or if I go and I sit down and look elegant, and I take up my hand and I bring down one finger and I touch a note. Boing! And that's all. I say, okay, sacred or secular? Everybody,
It's divided.
we don't know. I said, all right, I'm
Okay.
going to play another piece of music. So I play 3 or 5 notes. Sacred or secular? They're still, and then I really mix them up now. I go back and I, from the top of my head, whatever comes in my head, I play some nice chords and so on. Sacred or secular? And I make it sound sacred. And everybody says, sacred. Now, we do have, all of us, an association of what sounds sacred. So what I play something that to them sounds sacred. Similarly, I could go on the other side, play something that does not sound sacred, and they will say secular. Now, I don't want to make a certain statement here. Maybe a little bit too disturbing. But the line between, I'll modify it and put it this way, the line between sacred music and secular music in terms of the sound is very narrow.
Is it that we have made it narrow, or is it has always been narrow?
Pastor, that one involves swimming where it's deep.
Okay. Folk, we have to come back to discuss this issue. So this is just the first part. But before we end, I need to ask the panel, maybe briefly, each of you, could you furnish some guidelines in terms of our choice of music? What would you advise? Because you have outlined some of the challenges that could be faced by those who have preferences for this type and those who may, resist it. But what guidelines can all peoples use in determining what is good quality, perhaps even sacred music?
Well, I think you alluded to this, or we were in talking the conversation. It came up that the idea that music is powerful. I think that's the first thing we should be aware of. Music is powerful. That being said, we need to also be aware that music is powerful because, unlike a lot of the other things that come in through our, sensory organs, music bypasses everything.
Right.
So that's why you were saying earlier, you'd be somewhere sitting and music is playing and you're tapping your foot and you don't even realize it. And that's because, the music bypasses everything. I don't know why we were created that way, but that's just the way we were created.
Okay.
So we have to be really mindful of the things that we listen to.
Okay. Junior.
Yeah, I would state that agreeing with what Ellen was saying, be very mindful, be very aware of what you're listening to in a real sense. Ensure that whatever you're listening to, we've been built, we have built in inside of us something called a conscience. And somewhere deep down, you will know there's certain things that are just not appealing in the right way. There are different reasons you'll be listening to music for different reasons, as Doc was saying earlier. But the reality is that know that whatever is going in there would influence your behavior in whatever way, So be very aware of that, be very careful. And your choice of music, ensure that it is always something that can uplift you in one way, form, or the other.
Doc, you have a final word?
Well, let me try to compress it. On the worldview idea, I accept the fact that there's a God and there's a devil
That's right.
who wants our allegiance to the
That's right.
devil. And music is one of the most powerful tools
Sure.
to lead us in that direction.
That's right.
So that's where the matter of association comes into play.
Good.
So we got to be aware of the direction.
Good.
And because of time, I'm going to put it
Good.
together this way.
Thank you so much. My favorite text, or one of them, is put on the Lord Jesus Christ. Romans 13:14. Put on the Lord Jesus Christ. If we have to discern good from evil, he said, put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make not provision for the flesh to fulfill the lusts thereof. The only way we can discern between good and evil, seeing that, as Doc says, there are only two forces, get closer to Christ, and he will give you the ability to know what is right from what is wrong. Join us again as we continue our discussion on music, culture, and the Christian. Thank you for joining us on JC 24/7. We look forward to having you once again.